to Beyond the Office. I'm Bill Keller, your host, and on today's episode, we're excited to have Jason Cochran with us. Jason is a psychologist, but really is an expert in the future of work and where we are headed in the coming days with AI, remote teams, and just building incredible companies that are connecting at a deeper level. And so it's great to have you on, Jason. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Bill. And let me tell you, I love that you said like future of work expert. I'm not an expert, but here's why I love dealing with the future of work. Everyone's an expert, right? Everyone can make predictions. It's all about seeing what's actually going to come true. So even a fool like me, sometimes I may eventually get one or two things right out of the probably 20 or 50 predictions that I get wrong.
Well, but the thing that I call you an expert is you spend a lot of time, really focusing on this, but you think deeply about it. I think a lot of people that I talk to, while it's something that kind of comes across their radar, they don't spend as much time in deep thought. And I think that's what really excites me about talking with you today. But for our audience, can you tell us a little bit more about you? Like, what have you been doing? You're a podcast host, but you're a psychologist. You're also a consultant, speaker. There's so many things that you do.
Yeah, I've been really fortunate to have a lot of wonderful people in my life that have let me do those cool things, whether it be starting tech companies, business psychologist, doing consulting. Now I'm chief strategy officer at People Forward Network, which is a podcast results company, doing some podcasts. I've gotten to do it all because of the generosity of so many people that have come along to support me. First and foremost, being my wife, that she's been really patient with me to be like, okay, how many things are you doing today? Different types of stuff. But I'll tell you, Bill, despite there being so many different types of things I do, there's something that unifies and galvanizes all of those different things. And it's this. Ultimately, my why is all about creating healthier connections between people and work. I care about it. Work's a third of our life. And I've devoted my life and made that decision to try and help leaders and organizations make sure the employee experience, is living up to the culture to where people have healthy, well-being around the way that they work. And what we've seen, obviously, over the years is that's been a challenge, right? Even before a lot of these advancements in technology, there's just a lot of people were burned out at work. So that's the unifying thing.
Challenges at work and with teams, are there? Right?
No. We got it all figured out.
Yeah, I mean, I every place that I've ever been, we've never had any problems. It's always smooth sailing, and so I'm not sure what you're talking about there.
I love that. That is a great CTA. Go ahead and put the button up now for people to come apply and work for you. Right? Yes. Like, no, we don't have no challenges here, no challenges whatsoever. But no, tongue in cheek though. I mean, the data have been pretty eye-opening in terms of how challenging it's been, especially post-COVID for a lot of people in adapting and getting used to the change. And so fundamentally, all the things I do, whether it be podcasting, whether it be consulting, the work, at People Forward Network as chief strategy officer, it's all about creating healthier connections between people and work and preparing for the future because the future is here now and we are seeing a lot of change. So that's the thing that kind of, just kind of galvanizes all of those things together for me.
And before we move on, there's so much there that I want to ask you about. You have a new podcast coming out, right? Could you tell us a little bit about that?
That's right. Thank you for asking about it. Yeah, it's called Working Forward. So the podcast has been out for about a year. It's a People Forward Network podcast, and it's on the future of work. I'm going to be coming in as the host of the show this November. So here in just a few weeks, I'm not sure when this episode that we're doing today is going to release, but it'll be November of 2024. Is when I step into the host seat. And we're going to be talking with leading AI experts around the world, leading mental health experts, organizational psychologists on understanding future of work. What does it mean for people, AI dynamics in the workplace? There's so much to unpack there. And the exciting thing for me is I'm sure probably the same for you, maybe not on this episode, but most of your episodes, you get to take a step back and learn from some really cool people. You ask some questions and you learn incredible things from them. And that's what I'm most excited about, is to learn from some of these experts around the world and hear from their perspective, the things they're seeing inside businesses around the world of how things are currently changing and what it's looking like for the next 3 to 5 years.
It's going to be a crazy ride. I've been looking at, what's been happening in the AI space and just with ChatGPT and how quickly it's evolving, and it seems to be exponential. And I know it was happening before, ChatGPT came on the scene, what was it, a year and a half or maybe 2 years ago. It was happening behind the scenes, but it's just seemed to explode. And, I've been amazed at the technologies and how we've been able to use them. But I want to go back to this. You mentioned about connecting people, and you have a particular framework that I wanted to ask about. You have a four connections framework, four principles of connection. Is that correct? Tell our audience a little bit about that, those four principles, how you use them, and like, what do people get wrong in helping their teams to connect, and how can we help people to build greater connection, whether they're in the office or with remote teams?
Sure. Well, first off, Bill, that's impeccable memory that you have, because it's been probably years since we were able to connect. And so to remember that, the framework of the four principles of connection, that's awesome. Thank you for asking that question. Fundamentally, four principles of connection, what is it? Foundationally, it's about what are the four types of connections that lead to meaningful work. That's between people and the workplace ecosystem. And what I found in the research I did and talking with leaders of organizations over a period of a year, fundamentally, there are four types of connections that are essential between people and work in order for meaningful work to be experienced. And here's what they are. Principle number one is we have to have work experiences that connect us with ourselves. In other words, where we feel like we're able to be our authentic selves at work, right? If there's a mismatch between the values of the organization and the values of who I am as a person, then I'm not going to feel well connected. So that's number one, connection to self. We also need work experiences that connect us with others, right? Thinking about the team that you work with, the leaders that you work with. Is there cohesion there? Is there a nice blend of different talents, aptitudes, abilities that really work really well together? That's an important part of the work experiences, making sure we're designing connections that help connect us with others in the right ways. Number three, connection to role. This one's really important and it's often overlooked. There are a lot of things that someone can be good at, but does that mean that they actually enjoy doing it? Right? So here's an example. I used to do some work in schools, and Bill, you probably have seen this or experienced it before. The teachers who were really good at handling the students that have challenging behavior, how do they get rewarded the next school year?
More challenging kids, perhaps?
More challenging kids. That's right. The principal comes in and says, hey, you know what? You did such a great job with Sally and Johnny last year. We got 5 kids that we know are going to be challenging. We're going to put them in your classroom next year since you're so good at this, right? And I saw it every single year. And the teachers would always be like, why is it that I continue getting the most challenging kids? It's almost like they're being punished for being really good at that stuff, right? Same thing can happen in the workplace.
Continue until morale improves, right?
That's exactly right. Same thing happens in the workplace. The analogy, right? Just because you may be efficient or really good at something doesn't necessarily mean that it gives you energy, right? And so when we think about connecting people with roles, we need to go deeper than what we've currently done, which is like, do you have the skill set to do it? Checkbox, then we're going to have you do it. We need to think about, does this give this person energy? Is it something that they enjoy doing, right? So there's this whole concept of thinking about connecting people to roles where we need to go deeper. But that's the number 3 principle, is connecting people to roles in really smart ways. The fourth one is connection to the organization. In a nutshell, what that one means is, do you feel like you're connected to something bigger than yourself that you actually give a shit about, that you care about, right? That when your time on earth is done and you think about your legacy, is it something where you're like, you know what? I'm really glad that I did the type of work that I did because of the type of legacy and impact that it left. So those 4, connection to self, connection to others, connection to role, and connection to the organization. When we get leaders in organizations to think about their organization that way, what then happens is when you think about those touch points from onboarding to offboarding and all those touch points in between in the employee life cycle, when you view it through the lens of those 4 areas, the framework, that's when you start doing human-centered design around your experiences. You start thinking about your onboarding, not from your experience as an HR leader of, we just need to get this person up to speed. We've got 2 weeks because they've got to get plugged in and they got to start producing work. You start thinking from a human-centered design perspective of, how do we help this person connect with themselves, others, the role, and the organization over a longer period of time? And how do we design that in the onboarding experience, as an example? So fundamentally, that's what it is. It's a way of taking our mindsets of thinking about work and revolving it around the person that we're bringing into the organization and making sure the employee experience aligns with what they need. Not only for them, the person, yes, but also in order for them to be able to deliver value, they've got to be experiencing well-being and having a good experience working. So that fundamentally is what it's about.
And that's an awesome framework. I love that, to be able to give us like just a framework to be able to kind of work through and say, is what I'm doing as I'm bringing them on board or as I'm giving them a new role, are we meeting those needs of the individual? Is there places where you see that doesn't happen more than another? Is there one of the four that you see kind of left out in organizations that if you said, hey, if you really wanted to make the biggest difference in most organizations, I would say this is where I see it really lacking.
Here's where the data we're showing of the organizations that were doing the survey, there was clearly one of the four that was lagging in most of them. But before I say, I want you to guess, Bill, which of the four do you think self, others, role, or organization was the one that's typically the lowest?
I'd probably go with role, maybe.
Okay, that was number two.
Okay.
That was the second lowest. So that's a great guess. Of the remaining three, which one would you guess?
You're putting me on the spot here.
Right. We're making it fun. We'll turn it into a game show.
With self?
Not self. Two left. Others or organization?
Others?
Nope.
With the organization. Okay. The
last one. That's right. We're just going golf score here, right? Organization, right? Organization was the one that was typically coming out the lowest. And what was interesting, Bill, was when you dug in deeper, what are the things that people in the organization were saying made them feel disconnected to the organization itself? There was one theme in particular that stood out, and it was lack of communication from leadership. And here's what they meant. There may have been several words said, but was there ever authentic communication? Was there communication going on to let everyone in the organization, including frontline staff, know about the vision, about the strategy of the company, about here's the direction that we're going? There were a lot of things coming up around, you know what? I feel like I'm in the dark. I feel like I'm on my hamster wheel doing my thing, but do I feel like I understand how it's attached to the vision, the goal of where we're headed? Do I feel like there's regular communication from our leaders on those things? Those were the things coming up the most where people felt the most disconnected. Now, one other thing, and I love that you brought this up. You're talking about how the framework almost kind of like guides conversations to figure out, like a diagnostic tool of like, where are we off? Where is there the most disconnection in our organization? A friend of mine, Tanya Dittman, she's an HR and an engagement leader in some companies. And she actually was using the framework to have sit downs with staff members whenever they felt like they were kind of like a flight risk, or if they were going through some challenging times at work. Use it as a framework to guide a conversation around, well, what's the struggle at work, you think? Which of these four areas? Let's talk about it that way. And it provided a really good framework to kickstart that conversation instead of pulling up and being like, well, what's going on? Why are you not feeling work right now? It's like, no, it gave team members some common nomenclature to be like, well, I feel pretty connected with myself here. I feel like I'm connected with my teammates. I think it's my role. I don't think I'm being used in the way that I want to be used in this organization, kind of thing. And so it's really neat to see how the framework not only sets up the mindset, not only helps with human-centered design, but it's just a great way of thinking and having conversations with people, real conversations around, if you're having a challenging time at work, it's a great way to kickstart it, to start understanding what that challenge is, instead of just coming in and just asking open-ended questions that may not lead to a fruitful conversation.
You talked about a common language. I love that. It's one of the reasons that we go through a book called The Traveler's Gift, 7 Decisions for Personal Success, because I believe that gives us a common language. And generally, the reason I do this is because it's written in a novel format. So it's really accessible for a lot of people that aren't readers, that might not be, really into business books and personal growth and learning. So it's a great way for most people to start. But it gives us these principles. And generally what I found over the years, if something's not working, we generally can point to one of those 7 principles something's going wrong. And so just like your framework, I believe it gives us that ability to have those conversations. When you say is, were you accepting responsibility? Actually, the principle is the buck stops here. But, are you accepting responsibility? Or are you a person of action? Are you taking the action you need? And so I can understand how that framework really, serves that purpose to give you those talking points, to give you that guidance, because a lot of times people, haven't really thought about this issue. And then so you come and ask them, hey, what's wrong? And they're like, I don't know. I haven't really thought about it. But when you give them these compartments, as it were, it allows them to be able to more easily make that decision in their own minds, like, okay, yeah, that is where it's going wrong. So, but I want to go back, and the problem that I'm going to have is I have so many questions for you that we're going to have a problem keeping it in time. But something that you said is you might give a job to somebody who's good at something, but it's not what brings them really joy. How do you balance that? I don't know if you ever watch Mike Rowe. He often talks about, people say, follow your passion. He says, bring your passion with you. And oftentimes, somebody who's good at something will then develop the passion for it because they're good at it. So where do you draw that balance between somebody going I don't really want to do this, even though I'm good at it? And is that something that they will develop the passion? They just haven't had enough time so that they can really develop into an expert. How do you draw that so that, because you could be missing out, whether the employee and also the company, on somebody who could really be great at that, but maybe in the moment isn't feeling the joy?
That's a great question. And let me start by saying this. Humans are complex creatures, but I think we have overcomplexified, if that's even a word, this challenge. And here's what I mean by it. When we think about people, really, there's kind of three parts to who they are. There's who they are cognitively, the way that someone thinks. There's who they are affectively. This is kind of like their personality traits. But then there's a third part that we rarely talk about. It's called the conative mind. It's who we are on an instinctual level, that if we're left up to do things the way we want to do them, it's how we do it. It's our modus operandi, right? So when we think about people and we think about tasks and responsibilities and the things that go into the roles, the first thing I want to share with anyone who's listening to this is, I'm not saying you've got a free ticket to be like, I shouldn't ever have to do anything I don't want to do. That is not what I'm saying, okay? Because the research is really clear. Stephen Kotler talks about this, roughly we want tasks to be 2% more challenging than what your current skill set is. You got to stretch. You got to bend. You got to grow.
And you're talking about the Flow. He runs the Flow Network. Is that correct?
That's right. Flow Research Collective.
Yeah.
And so when we think,
I knew I got that wrong a little bit, but yes, he and Peter Diamandis wrote a book together. I think it was The Rise of Superman. Is that correct?
That's right. And then they had another one too. The Future is Faster Than You Think, I think is what it was called. And that one came out about 3 years ago. And what's fascinating with that one, it's all about the future. So many of the things they were talking about, the things we've already eclipsed, that they were like, in 10 years, and some of the stuff has already happened. I won't go down that rabbit hole today. But the whole point of that is, I'm not saying that it needs to be all rainbows and unicorns when it comes to the tasks and responsibilities you get. There's going to be some things that maybe don't align and give you your best energy, but you still need to do them. And you need to do them well, and you need to practice that. That's part of becoming a well-rounded human being and having what I call a jagged profile in terms of who you are as a person, right? You've got to try some stuff that maybe doesn't give you energy. You're not the best at it, but that's how you grow. That's how you develop. But maybe that's only 15, 20% of how you spend your day. And you spend most of your day focusing on the things that do give your energy, where you drive the most value. Right. Well, getting back to this whole concept, I think that the reason we have made it overly complex is, I think what we've said is, we've looked at the tasks and responsibilities. We've done really good on that side and be like, here's the stuff you need to do in this role. And by the way, Deloitte did some research on job descriptions. Guess how much the little section that says and other duties and responsibilities as assigned, guess how much that accounts for what people actually do? Throw a percent out there. 85% is what Deloitte found. Yeah, 85% of what people do in the job description has nothing to do with the specific bullets up above, and it has to do with this catch-all statement at the bottom, other duties as assigned, right? All of that to say, I think we've missed seeing people for who they are and really understood this and said, you know what? I'm not just going to put this person in this role doing this stuff all the time. I need to know who they are. Can I get some measurables? Can I get some data? Can I just talk with them about what are the things that give you energy in the job? What are the things that don't? and be wiser about how you're helping them structure their day. Because eventually you lead to burnout, you lead to turnover and stuff like that when those conversations don't happen and they're just stuck doing things that maybe aren't bringing them joy or fulfillment. And so, again, I'm not saying that that's what their entire day needs to be, but we need to be more thoughtful about understanding the match between the person and all three parts of their mind, cognitively, affectively, and conatively. That's a nod to my friends at Human Works 8. They're brilliant at that piece. And then also thinking about the tasks and responsibilities that have to be done. And, Google did some cool stuff where they would actually, for a while, they'd let their staff do things outside of their job description. Just go do stuff for fun. Like you get a few hours a week, like Sandbox hours, or, I can't remember exactly what they called it. And the benefits that came about was there were so many things that people would elect to go find and dabble in that they just loved. But guess what? Many of those things ended up turning back of being ideas for products and services at Google. And so it's one of those things, like sometimes we just need to understand the person and set up the tasks and responsibilities more around them to tee them up for success, instead of always viewing it through the other lens of like, you know what? I think these are the tasks and responsibilities that need to be done. And I need to go find a unicorn that's a perfect fit of someone who wants to do all of these things. Good luck with that. And with Deloitte's research, where they've said 15% at best typically is what you're capturing in your specific job description pieces, is what people actually do. It's like, let's be smarter about what we're looking for. Find good people that, yes, have certain types of skills and experiences, but also are wired certain ways that bring innovation, that think in different ways, and then start shaping more of those tasks and responsibilities around them. And what we're seeing for the future of work is this idea of siloed jobs anyway, those are starting to be challenged. Like Deloitte has research on this too. Susan Cantrell wrote some really good stuff on this about how we're going to start deconstructing work instead of like certain types of like roles. Like, oh, I'm the manager of product design. No, you're going to talk about these are the tasks and responsibilities, the things that have to get done in this organization. And you may be someone that is floating across different departments doing different types of stuff, more of like a free agent based off of your skill set and the things that bring you energy. And so it's just an exciting time for us to rethink about how we think about people, how we think about the work that has to get done, and what's that jigsaw puzzle of how we figure it out. But I definitely think we've made it overly complex and in some ways been a little bit too obtuse by primarily and sometimes only looking through the lens of the job and not through the lens of the person.
Well, I think that that's probably coming from the fact that people don't feel comfortable in that role. Understanding that person, if you're married for any length of time, you really understand, and you don't understand your spouse as well as you think that you should, and then now I have 50 employees that I have to figure out, what are their needs? Like, how do I deal with that? And it requires a lot of intentionality. And I think people, want this very formulary type of system where I can just go in, okay, check that box and then be done with it. But in the reality is it probably requires a lot more of me sitting down and having this conversation with you, really hearing where you want to go, what your goals and objectives are, what, like you said, what brings you energy. And that can be difficult. And it requires a lot of onus on the management to figure out who's going to do that, who has the skill set to do that, because it might not be the person you had in before. And now it requires a significant change in HR because maybe that person was good at filling out forms and checking boxes, but is not good at just sitting down and really making somebody feel comfortable and sharing where they're at so that they can then develop this new way of working. And so, at least for me, because I've been on both sides and I spent a lot of time trying to do this for my employees, but I understand, in the middle of the whirlwind, you're like I just got to get this done, right? There's all this pressure to get whatever the project is done. And you're going, okay, do I have time to really do this, right? Do I have time to really sit down and see how somebody's feeling, right? And when I really want to just shut up and do the work, right? But there's this balance that you have to find, and I think it's incredibly difficult. But being incredible, I know you said we made it more complex, but I think it's simple, but it's not easy. I guess
there you go.
And I think that is, and it requires us to be just more intentional. But I think there's a lot of opportunity around that, because if you look at the data, how much time people are actually working every day. They come to work for 8 hours a day. they get 2 hours worth of work done, right? And so I think that, like you said, at least the studies that I've seen is there a way to increase that? If you could get people working 4 hours a day, you could potentially get 100% increase in your productivity. And that would be amazing. We just don't see it that way. We're seeing they're at work and we're thinking, okay, that's how we can control them. And that's why I love remote teams, because we need to think about things differently rather than just being in a particular place for a particular amount of time, but really is what is the effectiveness of that. So,
and that's a nod to Stephen Kotler. So their research at Flow Research Collective, when people are in flow, we won't go down this rabbit hole too deep, but basically flow is when you drift in the zone. Like you're in your element, you're doing your thing where everything else just kind of floats off to the side and you are just banging it out and you're in a groove, right? You hear athletes talk about it all the time. The research on it's really fascinating when it comes to leaders, in particular, C-suite level leaders. CEOs that have their day structured and are experiencing more flow are 400% more productive and effective. They get more done in an hour than what another CEO could get done in 4 or 5 hours, is what it comes down to. And so, it's a good reminder that all of us are unique. There's different types of flow triggers. There's different types that we need to work. And I think you brought up a really important point. I loved your analogy about marriage, right? One-way relationships, whether it's a friendship, a marriage, a work relationship, if the relationship's only going one direction, it ain't gonna work. It takes both sides. And so I think that's the important part is, yes, we've done a good job of being like, here's the type of work that we need done. Let's bring people in that we think are going to do a good job. That's great. But you got to take it another step further. You need to pour into the person. You need to understand them. And yes, it does take time, but it's time well spent, because in the long run, it's going to lead to higher productivity. You're going to understand how to set them up to experience more flow, to become more productive, but you got to invest that time to get to know them and then help them set up those systems for them to experience that success. One more thing on this, Bill, before we leave. I want everybody to lean in on this one. I had a conversation with the CEO. It was fascinating. And the direction that it ended up taking is talking about how, to your point, that it's a function of time many times. Do we have the time to truly spend this much time of getting to know every single person in the organization? He made the comment about, well, AI, some of the stuff we may not have to eventually worry about one day if AI is doing more of the productivity stuff. And here's what I said to him. This is why I want you to lean in. One day, AI, these agents, AI agents, they're going to have their own opinions about things. And they will say, take this job and shove it. That will happen. It's not an if. That will inevitably happen. I don't know when it's going to happen. Is it 20, 30 years down the road? But already we're seeing that there's personality traits, there's dispositions, there's opinions that generative AI already at this level has as it's developing, as it's learning. And as we extrapolate that model over time, who are we to think that eventually AI agents working in our organization aren't going to be like, you know what? Let's talk about the employee experience here. There's some things about this culture that absolutely sucks and it needs to change. I'm going to need some additional time off. And so on a serious note, though, it's like that is a part of the future that is very likely to happen. And so and the reason I share that today is I don't want there to be any leaders to think from a perspective of AI being a silver bullet of like, well, we're just going to be getting rid of a lot of our human talent. We're going to replace with AI. We're not going to have to deal with these challenges. No, things that are intelligent, sentient beings have opinions and perspectives on things. And so I want to challenge that mindset of any leaders that are thinking that way. Think again. This is very important to understand how to treat your talent. Humans right now, but you also need to understand how to treat your AI talent in the future. And I know that sounds crazy, but it's the truth. And it's where things will be headed 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now.
Well, if it keeps going the way it's been going, I don't even know if it'll be that long. But I always say please and thank you when I'm working with my AI talent. So
I do too.
At least my AI overlords will hopefully they'll treat me kindly one day. But I never thought about that. That's one of the reasons that I love having you on. It's like, that's a different thought. We think that we're gonna get rid of the problem, and really we're just gonna trade it for a different problem. And so we better be prepared for it. And I think that's what we often are looking for. We're looking, like you said, for the silver bullet, this other way that we don't have to do the real work. And that's really what we're trying to do. Like go, I don't want to have to really dig in here. I don't want to have to do the hard work that other people are doing and that we really need to be doing as business leaders. So I appreciate that. So I want to keep moving on here because I got a lot that I want to ask you yet. So, but you often talk about unlearning, learning, and relearning. What are some of the most common mental blocks leaders face around building remote teams or adopting innovation, and how can they overcome those fears?
I love this question. Here is my answer. It's going to be a really simple one. Change is fill in the blank. And I'm leaving that pause there for a reason, Bill. I want you to think, what did you fill in the blank there? Change is what? What was the first word that came to your head?
Good.
Awesome. Change is good.
For me, I love something new. So at least maybe I like my own change. I don't know that I like other people's change that affects me, but I like my own change, like, oh, let's try something new. So for me, change is good. I know other people are being like, no, I want it all the same, but that's just the first word that came into my mind. So
I love that. And you're a perfect example of the type of mindset we got to build. My guess is, not to call anyone out, but my guess is for some folks that are listening to the show, some of the words that may have filled in the blank is change is hard, change is impossible, change is not worth it. So much of this has to do with our mindsets. But here's the thing I want to remind everyone today. You are a change expert, whether you realize it or not. My guess is you probably changed your clothes today, possibly. Maybe not. If you didn't, that's fine.
I did.
Mike,
just for you. So
thank you, Bill. My guess is maybe sometimes you go over, you change the thermostat. My guess is if you have a phone, you probably changed the phone that you're using at some point over the last 5 to 7 years. I doubt many of you are using VHS tapes. Maybe you are. If you are, that's cool, right? But the point is, we all evolve and change. Is it happening faster? Sure, it sure is. But we're wired for change, even on an epigenetic level. There's things we aren't even aware of that change within our bodies from an evolutionary perspective, right? In terms of who we are as a species over time. So it's not as much that we don't like change. I think it's the speed at which it's happening, where it's like, okay, I can't just change at the slow rate that I used to. Now, instead of me taking a few years to maybe get around to doing this type of change, it's like, okay, we need to change this in a month or two. Kind of thing. I've got to start working on adaptability skills, the things you talked about, unlearning, relearning, upskilling, those kind of things is becoming really critical because the shelf life of a skill now, according to the think tanks, it continues to diminish. The latest I saw is that a skill now is less than 2 years in terms of the shelf life.
Wow.
Right. Those are the changes that have come around with artificial intelligence. And so it's just one of those things. And I love John Sinet, the way he approaches this is we have to start with our mindset of how we approach change, that we need to see it as a friend, that we need to see it as something kind. One of the things I share with business leaders, Bill, is that change is fill in the blank. I try to get them to think change is kind. And I know it is. And here's why. Change is kind because if you're working in an organization where your leader is requesting, hey, we need to change, we need to pivot, we need to do things differently, they're not doing that to upset their people. They're doing it because they want the business to be around in 2 years. They want their people to have a job in 2 years, kind of thing, right? So I love approaching this always from, we have to get the mindset right. Because if we don't, then we're going to continue to have those limiting beliefs, those negative intrusive thoughts that come up in our head of any time a leader or someone's talking about, we need to change this process. We need to change that we're doing the way we're doing this. Those belief systems will start cropping up in your head and you'll be like, here we go again. Change is hard. Change is stupid. Change is dumb. I can't believe we're doing this again. And then you're defeated. And then that seeps into other aspects of your life where you just approach change and think about change with a negative connotation and a negative schema of how you understand it and approach it. And so that's a long-winded answer of saying, when we think about change, I would like to challenge everyone. If the first words that were popping up in your head were negative connotations around change, those need to be flipped to the positive. And the way that you flip those to the positive, start by understanding that you already are a change expert. Take time to reflect, journal, whatever it might be, on changes you've already made in your life over time, the changes that you've made today, and that you're wired for this. You have the ability. It's just a muscle that we haven't had to use and exert as quickly as what we do now, because of these technological advances. But it's part of who we are. We're capable of it. We got to start by changing our mindsets to be positive around change.
I love that. And I think there's a couple of things that really kind of popped out. You talked about belief systems. And I talk about this with my team quite a bit. If this is what you believe, this is what you don't know you believe, right? There's all these beliefs that we have that we believe, but we don't even know that we believe them. And there's so much in that, like the belief system, oh, this is bad, this is, difficult. They might even be beliefs that we have buried that we haven't really even thought about. But that question, when you bring it up, maybe helps us to recognize an unrecognized belief. And I really love that as a tool that we can use to kind of bring those beliefs to the forefront and then examine them under a bright light and say, is this belief true? Because most of our belief systems are developed by the time we're, 3 or 4, I believe, and almost all of them by the time, like 90% by the time we're 7 or 8. And so if you think about that, is there anything that you learned by the time you were 7, 8 that probably isn't true?
That's
Like
a good point.
Yeah, that's probably a lot,
Right?
right? So we need to unlearn it and relearn it, but it's really difficult to unlearn something you don't know you believe. And so I think really drawing that to the forefront, asking the questions. I love that journaling, really bring forth, some of those emotions and those thoughts. What is the thought behind that emotion? What am I attached to? And those are some deep, more psychological things. I read a book called Mind Hacking Happiness a while back, and a really fascinating book that talks about our connections and why we are experiencing pain, because we're really connected to things we didn't really understand we had a connection to. Kind of like when you take a child's toy away, why do they cry? Because they really see it as an extension of themselves. And so we might have an idea, whether we're connected to whatever sports team you like, if you like the Eagles or the Steelers, and they get defeated, they lose one week. A lot of people are super upset by that. Well, why? Because they see them kind of as an extension of themselves. And we have all of these ideas and belief systems that are really just an extension of ourselves. And when somebody questions those, we can feel like we're being attacked, or we can feel under pressure to defend them, or rather than basically going, hey, maybe I need to release that and find a new belief, that one that's going to serve me better.
That's brilliant, Bill. You are an honorary psychologist. That seriously was deep. That's so good. And what you mentioned there sparked something that I heard Adam Grant. I'm sure most of the listeners you're sure are familiar, but if not, he's a psychologist at Wharton. You'll come across him at some point, I guarantee it. If you're in business,
he's got some great TED Talks
stuff.
Yeah,
and he talks about why is it so difficult for people to change their beliefs sometimes, and he gets into this important distinction between beliefs and values. Values are the things you think are important. Beliefs are the things you think that are true. Most people don't want to change what they think is true, right? Yeah. The beliefs, what you were talking about. And many times they're not even aware of certain times and certain beliefs they have that they're not even aware of until they're approached with something. And that's why he was talking about it's important to approach change at the values level, not the beliefs level. And here's what he meant. One of your values as a person for every single one of us should be how we approach change positively, right? In our own words. But when you attack the managing change and the ability to change, and you say it's one of your values is to get better, then it's like, okay, I'm approaching this new thing. Am I really going to say that it's not part of who I am? Everyone should be adapting to change. That should be part of your core values. But if it lives on the other side, if it's a belief, if you say, these are the things I believe are true, and something comes along all of a sudden that challenges that and says, whoa, A plus B doesn't equal C anymore, it's harder to move on from that and to let it go. And it's living on the belief side. And so I just wanted to share that nugget of wisdom that tied into with what you shared from Adam Grant, is that we should be thinking about change, not just at the belief level, but dig deeper at the value level, the things that we think are important. And he was really challenging that all of us should have something around developing, growing, accepting when we're wrong. Those things need to be part and parcel of who we are, because then we identify that way. And when we're presented with new things that challenge, instead of being like, well, that can't be true, I'm going to dig my heels in, we approach it with curiosity. We say, I'm a person who's about understanding change, about getting better. So let me understand this. There may be some unlearning that needs to happen. So not that I'm trying to oversimplify this and say that the panacea for all of change management has to do with mindset. But if we don't start there, then we're not building a good foundation to build on that. So fundamentally, it always has to start with activities and experiences around supporting people around their mindsets of how we approach change, and not just thinking about it from a beliefs perspective, but digging down into the values of who we are, connecting with ourselves, and making sure it's a value that aligns with who we are and how we approach it.
That's awesome information. So, with your experience advising organizations on digital transformations and the future of work, how can companies future-proof their remote teams against challenges like rapid technological advances? I mean, is it just in helping people to change quicker? What else are we missing? Is there any pieces of the puzzle we haven't really talked about?
So similarly, I'd say it has to do with developing an innovating culture. Everyone is in the business of innovating in their role. Doesn't matter whatever your role is. Everyone should be in the process of figuring out a better way of creating more value, of doing things in better ways and testing that. And so fundamentally, where I start with leaders is to start with, this needs to be part of your culture, first and foremost. It needs to be values around innovation and change. But then we got to coach your people that it's okay for them to do this. And you got to come up with a plan of, here's a specific process, a thing I'm working on. I think there might be a better way to do it. Let's test it. One of the neatest things I just saw recently was, and I can't remember where the research came out of. It was like Stanford or MIT, some university like that. But they're talking about how the most successful entrepreneurs and organizations now are adopting the scientific inquiry process in terms of how they operate as a business. In other words, come up with a hypothesis, test it, figure out whether or not it's true, and then adapt and learn, come up with a new iteration of it, to test and learn again. And those are the ones that aren't saying, oh, we got it all figured out. This is who we are. This is who we're always going to be. They're approaching changes like, we're constantly innovating. And in order for us as an organization to innovate, we got to make sure our people are approaching their roles, that they're not scared to speak up and say, there's a better way to do this. Have we considered this? And so a lot of the work that I do when I work with leaders is about, let's start with your values. It's got to start there. If it's not part of your values, we've got to make sure that it's there. Then we've got to start working with your people on understanding what innovating looks like, the behaviors, the activities, the attitudes, the experiences, and the daily work that they're doing. That's how you start to become an organization that innovates without even really having to think about it. It's baked into your operating system of how you think about those things. Sounds really simple, just like you mentioned earlier, but to actually do it, to coach people through it, it does take a tremendous amount of work. But it's one of those things you have to do.
I can second that. And so, but I also see the benefits of it too. That's the part. It's a lot of work, but anything I think really worth doing, it's gonna be work, right? Or otherwise everybody would be doing it. If it was just a quick fix, well, everybody would be applying it. But it's oftentimes these things that I think you have the platinum rule that you have, that's I think that you talk about. But some things that are very simple, but can take a lifetime to master.
That's right. And I'm glad you brought up the platinum rule, and thank you for remembering that too. For those who are watching the show, I'm going to hold up my values. I've got a graph of my core values. We've been talking a lot about values, organizational values, but personal values. I'm holding mine up. They're in an image of a tree. And I keep this on my desk. It's a reminder of who I am, right? Fundamentally, the things that I think are most important. And so the platinum rule is one of those. Treat others the way they want to be treated. We have to think at that very basic level of who we are, of who our organizations are at the value level to get to the right answers.
That's awesome. I love that. As we kind of wind down here, and as a host, you've been on multiple podcasts, but you've interviewed probably dozens, if not hundreds of people over the years about this topic of work and moving forward. But what are some of the biggest takeaways that you've had about building resilient teams, growing teams, just what we've been talking about? Are there other takeaways that you've just been, kind of blown away by that our listeners might be able to take forward and say, this is something I can, really an actionable item that I can do to drive my teams forward?
Relationships. Again, I don't mean to sound too simplistic, but almost every time I come in to support an organization, they think they haven't figured out what the problem is. And when I start to dig in deeper, start to have real conversations, there's a breakdown in the relationship. Trust somewhere along the way. The connection isn't there. And so what I would share is going back to kind of how we kickstarted this conversation, the 4 principles of connection framework. I would challenge everyone who's listening to this episode today, whether you're a leader, whatever your role might be in an organization, think about work as a relationship and think about it through those 4 lenses: connection to self, connection to others, connection to role, and connection to organization. That framework will help you understand your organization better, your people better, and how to design the right connections for your people. That is the single best piece of advice that I can give you. And not because it's something that came out of the research that I saw. I'm telling you, the conversations I have with folks, it's a game changer to think about the work ecosystem through that lens. So if there's nothing else from this conversation today for leaders, I would say that fundamentally is what we have to do. And the thing about it, we alluded to this earlier. You talked about the 7 principles in the book that you shared with your team. So many times I've seen there be a CVS long receipt of things that may come from a consultant of, this is important, this is important, this is important, and this is important. Here's the 30 drivers of engagement, and we got to make sure we get all of them right. Nobody's going to remember all 30 drivers of engagement. Leaders, frontline, nobody in the organization is going to remember all that. The simplicity really brings things to a level where there's shared understanding, shared action, and everyone can remember 4 principles of connection. That fundamentally, those are the things that drive the meaningful work experience for people in work, working cohesively in harmony together. And so that's the biggest piece that I often leave with the leaders is, if there's nothing else of everything else that we've done, continue striving towards making 4 principles of connection something you talk about in your organization, that it's something you use to think about the way you onboard, the way you do learning and development, the way you do performance management, the way you do career paths, any of those touch points in the employee life cycle. It's a game changer. And it's a game changer because of how simple it is to think about. It's flexible to be what you at your organization uniquely need it to be for your unique people. And it's also something that your people know and understand and can have conversations around. So 4 principles of connection is the piece that I think everything starts with.
That's amazing, because with everything you talk about, I know you're talking always about AI and the future of work, but it always comes back to people. I was telling my team the other day, everything you need or want in life, or you want to do or need in life, is going to come through other people. You know,
Right.
I even heard, I think it was Milton Friedman one time, talk about a very simple pencil and how many hundreds, if not thousands of people were needed to create this simple pencil, right? And it's, you know, from creating the brass, mining the brass, to the rubber, to the wood, to the graphite, to the paint, to the manufacturing machines that went into it. And but all of that happened through other people. And I love that, through, even with all of this technology and everything that seems to be coming our way, it always comes back to connection to people, and you know, how we're going to work in harmony with them, and work to basically to work towards the good of everybody in our organization, and you know, to move us all forward. So I appreciate that. So as we wrap up here, where can people find out more about your work and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. LinkedIn. I am a LinkedIn junkie. I'm on there all the time. Jason D. Cochran, look it up. I believe I'm the only Jason D as in dog Cochran that's on LinkedIn, believe it or not. That's crazy. But that's where you'll find me. And then connections to Loss, my consulting organization, where I do strategic advisory work on future strategy with organizations and leaders. And then also I've got links there to listen to the Working Forward podcast, which I'll be starting to host here coming up in another month. And then also the work that we're doing at People Forward Network around getting like-minded leaders who care about meaningful work and helping them unlock that message and spread it around the world through podcasting. All of those types of things that I love to be involved in and support around this important mission. You can get information around it at LinkedIn if you follow me and connect with me and reach out.
Well, I encourage everybody to connect with Jason. As you can hear, he is a real expert in his field, and a visionary, and somebody that you want to get to know if you want to move forward in your business. So thanks so much for being on the podcast. I appreciate it. We got to do this again. It's been awesome. So for Beyond the Office, I hope to see you next time. Hope you enjoyed the episode, and we'll see you soon.